She was young, pure, insecure, until the older millionaire whispered in her ear, "I only want to make you happy." Was it true love, or just words? Tell me, where are you watching from? If you want to know how this heartbreaking story ends, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. You won't regret it. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of the Soho art space, bathing the contemporary artworks in a golden glow that transformed the ordinary into the sublime. Emily Parker, 21 years old with dark hair pulled back in an improvised bun, meticulously adjusted the frame of an abstract watercolor, conscious of its value not only in monetary terms, but in the creative effort it contained. Art, like life, is sustained by the delicate balance between what we show and what we hide, she thought, as her fingers barely grazed the canvas surface. She didn't notice the gaze observing her from across the room. Michael Thompson, 39, wearing a tailored suit and bearing the weight of 3 failed marriages on his shoulders, watched with fascination the precise movements of this young woman who seemed to exist in her own bubble, oblivious to the world of privilege in which he navigated with boredom. It was the 3rd time he had visited the gallery that week, and although he justified himself by saying he was interested in the new minimalist exhibition, the truth was that he had returned solely to see her. The first time he noticed her was almost by accident. Emily was passionately explaining the meaning of an installation to a couple of European tourists, and what caught his attention wasn't her evident beauty, but the luminosity she radiated when talking about something that genuinely mattered to her. That inner light dramatically contrasted with the emptiness he felt, despite the buildings bearing his name scattered throughout Manhattan. "Excuse me," his deep voice interrupted Emily's thoughts. "Could you explain the concept behind this piece?" She turned, surprised. The man was pointing precisely at the work she least liked in the entire exhibition, a completely white canvas with a tiny red line in the bottom corner. "Of course," she responded professionally as she approached, noticing the subtle scent of sandalwood and leather emanating from him. The artist explores the dichotomy between emptiness and minimal presence. It's a commentary on how sometimes the smallest element can alter an entire universe of whiteness. Michael wasn't looking at the artwork, but at her. "Interesting. I wonder if that also applies to people, if a fleeting encounter can transform an entire universe." The comment disconcerted her. It wasn't the typical pretentious art dialogue she usually heard from wealthy clients. There was an implicit vulnerability, almost imperceptible beneath layers of apparent confidence. "Depends on the universe and the intensity of the encounter, I suppose," Emily replied, feeling an unexpected flutter in the pit of her stomach. Their gazes crossed for the first time, establishing a connection that transcended words. In that instant, neither could imagine how their orbits, apparently destined to revolve in worlds separated by abysses of class and experience, would begin an inevitable collision that would change everything. Steam rose from the artisanal ceramic coffee cup, creating spirals that Emily watched distractedly while waiting. She had accepted Michael's invitation after 3 casual encounters at the gallery, each longer than the previous. The cafe, located in a cobblestoned alley near Washington Square Park, was the kind of place that didn't appear in tourist guides. Exposed brick walls, old books stacked on uneven shelves, and a local clientele that spoke in whispers about politics and literature. She felt out of place, not because of the bohemian atmosphere, which was actually more comfortable than the elegant sterility of the gallery, but because of the situation itself. What was she? The daughter of a mechanic from the Bronx and a theater costume seamstress, waiting for a man who, according to her Google search the night before, appeared on the list of New York's 100 most important fortunes. The door opened, and Michael entered, bringing with him a gust of autumn chill. He was dressed surprisingly casually, dark designer jeans and a grey cashmere sweater that highlighted the silver at his temples. Emily instinctively tensed, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her vintage dress bought at the Brooklyn flea market. "You arrived on time," she said by way of greeting. "And you arrived 15 minutes early," he responded with a smile that revealed he knew more than he let on. Nervousness or excessive punctuality, both qualities I find charming. Emily felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "How do you know?" "I asked the barista," he confessed as he sat across from her. "A bad professional habit. I always seek to have all possible information. The conversation flowed with a naturalness neither expected. They talked about art first, safe territory for Emily. Then books. He confessed his weakness for Walt Whitman's poetry, she her passion for Hemingway. They discussed independent cinema and the gentrification of traditional New York neighborhoods. With each topic, the abyss between their worlds simultaneously became more evident and more irrelevant. "I've always wanted to study art restoration in London," she confessed after her second coffee, "but there are more urgent priorities, like paying rent and helping my parents with bills." Something darkened in Michael's gaze. "You know what's most ironic?" he said, lowering his voice. "I could finance anyone's studies at any university in the world without affecting my bank account, but I've never had a passion as clear as yours. I built an empire of glass and steel, but I can't remember the last time I felt genuine excitement about anything." The comment hung between them, revealing an unexpected intimacy. Emily felt a pang of compassion mixed with wariness. There was something magnetic about this man who seemed to have everything except the essential. As they said goodbye at the cafe door, Michael intentionally brushed her fingers while handing her his card. "My personal number is on the back," he murmured. "It's not the one that appears on Google." Emily took the card, aware that accepting it meant much more than a simple exchange of contacts. It was opening a door to a completely unknown world, with all its promises and dangers. That night, in her small apartment shared with 2 journalism students, Emily stared at the card for hours, passing it between her fingers like a mysterious talisman. Finally, she took her phone and saved the number, naming it simply M. She wasn't ready to call yet, but neither was she ready to close that door. Central Park sparkled under the morning light. Emily walked slowly among visitors, taking advantage of her day off to visit the temporary installation everyone was talking about, a series of mirrors that fragmented and multiplied reality, creating a labyrinth of reflections that questioned the perception of space. "It's like our minds, isn't it?" Michael's voice behind her made her start. "Fragments of reality that we rearrange according to our desires and fears." Emily turned, unable to hide her surprise. "Are you following me?" she asked directly. Michael smiled, accepting the accusation without pretense. "Technically, yes. I saw your Instagram story this morning. It seemed like an indirect invitation." Emily narrowed her eyes. She had shared a story with the location, true, but never thought he would see it, much less interpret it as an invitation. "That's unsettling," she replied, although a part of her secretly felt flattered. "Or romantic, depending on the prism through which you look," he countered, pointing to one of the mirrors that distorted their silhouettes. "Like these reflections, it depends on where you position yourself to observe." They walked together for hours, first through the installation, then along Central Park paths. Autumn painted the park with ochre and golden hues, and the cool breeze carried dry leaves that crunched beneath their steps. Emily surprised herself by sharing anecdotes from her childhood in the Bronx. Afternoons in her father's workshop, amid the smell of motor oil and the sound of tools, nights helping her mother sew sequins onto costumes she could never afford. Michael listened with genuine attention, as if each detail of her ordinary life were a fascinating revelation. He shared very little about himself, dodging questions about his past with the skill of someone who has spent years avoiding revealing too much. They stopped by the lake, watching couples rowing in the boats. "I have a proposal for you," Michael said suddenly, his tone becoming more serious. "I've been looking for someone with artistic knowledge for a private collection I'm developing. I need advice for new acquisitions and supervision of the work's maintenance. The salary would be significantly better than the galleries." Emily looked at him fixedly, processing what she had just heard. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering an opportunity," he clarified, "for both of us. You gain valuable experience and resources for your future studies. I obtain the vision of someone who understands art beyond its commercial value." The proposal floated between them like one of the autumn leaves, apparently light but laden with implications. Emily felt the growing tension, the vertigo of a decision that could alter the course of her life. "And what do you expect in return exactly?" she finally asked, giving voice to the elephant in the room. Michael's gaze darkened momentarily, as if the question had offended him. "Only your professional honesty and your time," he responded in a controlled voice. "Whatever happens between us, If anything should happen, we'll be completely independent of the professional agreement. You have my word. Emily wanted to believe him. Part of her already did. But another part, the one that grew up watching her mother struggle for every dollar, warned her about powerful men and their promises. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, he nodded. Take all the time you need, the opportunity will still be there. As they said goodbye, he kissed her gently on the cheek, a delicate gesture that contrasted with his usual imposing presence. The brush of his lips sent a shiver down Emily's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. That night, lying in her narrow bed, listening through the thin walls to her roommate's television, Emily contemplated the peeling ceiling while Michael's proposal spun in her mind like a relentless carousel. What troubled her most wasn't the offer itself, but how much she wanted to accept it. The mansion in Westchester County emerged among centuries-old cypress trees, like a fortress of stone and privilege. Emily watched through the car window as the perfectly manicured gardens gave way to a contemporary construction inspired by traditional American architecture, with interior courtyards and fountains that evoked colonial estates. 2 months had passed since she accepted Michael's proposal, and although she continued working at the gallery 3 days a week, the rest of her time was dedicated to cataloging and managing the impressive private collection of the businessman. The transformation in her life had been vertiginous. Her bank account, eternally at its limit, now showed a figure that provided her with a security she had never experienced. She had been able to buy a new washing machine for her parents and start saving for her studies in London. Her relationship with Michael, however, remained in an undefined limbo. Professional in appearance, charged with romantic tension in reality. As she got out of the car, Emily adjusted her new blazer, an indulgence she had allowed herself with her first salary, and walked toward the main entrance where Wilson, the butler, was already waiting. "Good morning, Miss Parker," he greeted formally. "Mr. Thompson is waiting for you in the study. You have a visitor." Emily frowned. There was no meeting scheduled in their shared calendar. The study was an octagonal room located in the back of the mansion, with large windows overlooking an orchard. Upon entering, she found Michael conversing animatedly with an elegant woman in her 50s. The vibrantly tense atmosphere immediately indicated to her that she had interrupted something important. "Emily!" Michael stood up with evident relief. "Come, I want to introduce you to Victoria Wilson, director of the Met. Victoria, this is Emily Parker, my art advisor." The woman scrutinized her with a gaze that seemed to pierce through her, evaluating every detail from her posture to the quality of her clothing. "So you're the young woman from the Bronx who has captivated our elusive collector," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Michael was telling me wonderful things about your eye for contemporary art." Emily felt that each word hid a subtext. "Young woman from the Bronx" sounded like a subtle disqualification, captivated, insinuated motivations that went beyond the professional. "It's an honor to meet you, Director Wilson," she responded with a confidence she didn't feel. "Your work in democratizing access to contemporary art has been inspirational for many of us." The woman seemed surprised by the articulate response. "I see you don't just have a good eye, but also a good memory for the interviews I give," she replied, slightly softening her attitude. "Michael was telling me you're considering acquiring Lucia Mendoza's complete series on urban fragmentation." The conversation drifted to professional territory. Emily surprised herself by heatedly discussing artistic trends and new values in the American panorama, defending her opinions even when they contradicted Victoria's. Michael observed the exchange with a mixture of pride and fascination, occasionally intervening but letting Emily carry the weight of the conversation. When Victoria finally left, promising future collaborations, Emily felt the exhaustion from sustained tension. "You were brilliant," said Michael, approaching to serve her a glass of wine. Victoria came fully intending to find a decorative girl and leaves respecting a professional. "Is that why you invited me to this meeting without warning me?" "To test me," Emily asked, unable to hide a certain resentment. "To protect you," he corrected. "If I had warned you, you would have spent the night preparing. You'd be tense, nervous. This way, you were yourself, natural and passionate." Exactly what I needed Victoria to see. Emily wanted to be angry, but she understood the twisted logic of his reasoning. Still, the sensation of having been manipulated, even with good intentions, left a bitter taste. "Next time, warn me," she said firmly. "I'm not a piece in your collection that you can strategically position, Michael. I deserve to be prepared for the battles you decide I should fight." Something flashed in his eyes, a glimmer of respect mixed with surprise. He wasn't used to having limits imposed on him. "You're right," he conceded after a silence. "I'm sorry." Those two words, so simple and so infrequent on his lips, fell between them like drops of rain on dry earth. It was the first time Emily had seen him acknowledge a mistake, show genuine vulnerability. They looked at each other intensely across the space that separated them, both aware that something fundamental had changed. The first crack in Michael's perfect facade had formed, revealing the flesh and blood man behind the implacable businessman's mask. Emily took a step toward him, reducing the physical distance as a metaphor for the new emotional terrain they were beginning to explore. When their lips finally met for the first time, the kiss tasted of newly discovered truth and of boundaries beginning to dissolve. Jazz music floated softly through Michael's Upper East Side penthouse, where they now spent most nights together. 4 months had passed since that first kiss in the study, transforming their professional relationship into something much deeper and more complex. Emily had adapted surprisingly well to this new world of privileges: dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, exclusive galleries that opened just for them, impromptu weekends in European capitals. On that winter night, New York was covered with an unusual blanket of fog that transformed the urban landscape visible from the panoramic windows. Emily, wrapped in a silk robe that Michael had given her after his trip to Milan, observed the city while he slept deeply in the adjoining room. Her phone vibrated with a WhatsApp notification. It was Lily, her former colleague from the gallery. "Have you seen this? Everyone in New York is talking about it. Call me when you can." The message included a link to a digital society magazine. With an uncomfortable presentiment, Emily opened the page to find a sensationalist headline: "The Real Estate King and His New Muse. True Love or Repeated History." The article included photographs of both at various events, most taken with a telephoto lens, along with a text full of insinuations about their age difference and social origins. But what really left her cold was the final paragraph. "Sources close to Thompson remind us that this pattern is not new for him, who has historically shown predilection for young women of humble origin, whom he rescues temporarily from mediocrity. His second marriage to dancer Amy Sullivan and his tumultuous relationship with photographer Ellen Donahue followed exactly the same script that seems to be unfolding now with the young gallerist from the Bronx." Emily felt nauseated. They had never discussed Michael's previous marriages in depth. She knew they had existed, of course, but he always evaded the topic when she mentioned it, and eventually she had stopped asking. With trembling hands, she searched Google for the names mentioned in the article. The information she found confirmed her worst fears. Amy Sullivan, 22 when she met Michael, from a small Midwest town, now divorced and back in her homeland. Ellen Donahue, 25 during her relationship with him, raised in a Harlem community, currently working in Paris after an apparently turbulent separation. The pattern was undeniable, as was the sensation of having been deceived not with direct lies, but with calculated omissions. "Can't sleep?" Michael's voice startled her. He was leaning against the doorframe, his bare torso contrasting with his black silk pajama pants, observing her with a mixture of tenderness and concern. Emily instinctively locked her phone screen, but the expression on her face must have been eloquent enough. "What happened?" he insisted, approaching. "Do you know Amy Sullivan?" she asked directly. "And Ellen Donahue?" Michael stopped abruptly, his face transforming instantly. The mask of security fell, revealing an expression Emily had never seen: shame mixed with irritation. "Where did you get those names?" "That doesn't matter," she replied, maintaining her calm despite the inner turmoil. "What matters is that I seem to be the third iteration of a very specific pattern in your life. Young, of humble origin, dazzled by your world. Did you also plan to discard me when you got tired?" The words floated between them like sharp crystals. Michael ran a hand through his graying hair, visibly disconcerted by the direct confrontation. "It's not that simple, Emily," he said finally. "Yes, there were patterns, but each story was unique. With Amy, I married on impulse. She wanted stability after years of struggle as a dancer. With Ellen, it was destructive passion from the beginning. Neither of those relationships resembles what we have, you and I. And what exactly do we have? She pressed. Because seen from outside, it looks exactly like the same story repeating itself. Michael slowly approached and sat across from her, his gaze more vulnerable than Emily had ever seen. We have the possibility of breaking that pattern, he responded with a broken voice. With you, I felt for the first time in decades that I didn't need to maintain the walls I built to protect myself. This vulnerability terrifies me, but it also gives me hope. There was a heart-wrenching sincerity in his words that Emily couldn't ignore. Still, doubt had installed itself like a shadow between them. I need time to process this, she said finally, and I need absolute honesty from now on. No more secrets, no more conveniently hidden pasts. Michael nodded gravely. I'll tell you everything you want to know. No filters, no excuses. That night, as fog continued to fall over New York, transforming the city into an unreal landscape, Michael spoke for hours. He told her about his privileged but emotionally arid childhood with an authoritarian father who measured people's worth by their utility, about his failed marriages and how, after each breakup, he had reinforced his emotional defenses, convincing himself that true love was a luxury he wasn't destined to experience. He spoke of his deepest fears, of irrelevance, of loneliness, of repeating his father's mistakes. Emily listened, asked, confronted when necessary. As the night progressed and the confessions deepened, she felt she was meeting the real Michael Thompson for the first time, not the successful businessman or the passionate lover, but the vulnerable and contradictory man who existed behind those facades. At dawn, exhausted but strangely renewed, they embraced in silence as the first rays of sun converted New York's fog into ephemeral diamonds. They hadn't resolved all their problems, nor dispelled all doubts, but they had torn down a fundamental wall between them. The revelation of past patterns, painful as it had been, opened the possibility of building something new and authentic upon the ruins of broken expectations. Spring had arrived in New York with an explosion of colors that contrasted with the gray of the recently departed winter. Emily walked hurriedly along Fifth Avenue, heading to the cafe where she had arranged to meet her mother, Susan. It had been weeks since they had seen each other, and although they spoke regularly by phone, Emily knew that the pending conversation was inevitable. The Sunflower Cafe was one of those places heroically resisting gentrification. Checkered tablecloths, reasonable prices, and a primarily local clientele. Emily had deliberately chosen neutral ground, far from both the Bronx and the exclusive circles she now frequented with Michael. Susan was already waiting, unmistakable with her auburn-dyed hair and small but strong hands from a lifetime of sewing. Seeing her daughter, her face lit up with a smile that immediately transformed into an evaluative expression of astonishment. "You look different," she said by way of greeting, hugging her tightly. "Thinner, but with another presence. And that bag must cost more than my sewing machine." Emily smiled uncomfortably, conscious of how her appearance had subtly changed. The designer bag had been a gift from Michael, as was most of her current wardrobe. "Don't start, Mom," she responded as she sat down. "How's Dad and your back pain?" The conversation flowed to safe territories: her father's health, new costume orders for Broadway productions, problems with the apartment heater. But Emily noticed her mother's penetrating gaze, that unique capacity to see beyond polite words. "When are we going to meet this man?" Susan finally asked, going straight to the point as she always had. "You've been with him for 6 months, living practically in his house, and for us he's still just a name." "It's complicated," Emily replied, stirring coffee that already didn't need more sugar. "Michael has a very tight schedule, and I—" "You what?" her mother interrupted. "Are you afraid we won't fit into his elegant world? Or maybe it's the opposite?" The question hit home, awakening a guilt Emily had tried to ignore. It was true that she had deliberately kept both aspects of her life separate, as if they belonged to universes that shouldn't collide. "It's not that simple," she murmured. "It never is with men like him." Susan nodded, and there was so much understanding in her voice that Emily felt a lump in her throat. "Honey, I'm not judging your decisions. I just want to make sure you're building something real, not living a fairy tale that will vanish like smoke." "I received a letter from the London School of Fine Arts," Emily said abruptly, changing the subject. "They've accepted me for the fall program." Susan's eyes opened with surprise and pride. "That's wonderful, your lifelong dream." "Michael offered to pay for everything," Emily continued. accommodation, tuition, expenses. He says it's an investment in my future. Her mother's expression became more cautious. And what do you think of doing? That's the question, Emily replied, looking directly into eyes that so resembled her own. I've decided to reject his help. I'm going to apply for a scholarship and a student loan. If I don't get it, I'll wait another year and keep saving. A silence laden with meaning settled between them. Susan extended her hand across the table to take her daughter's. You're afraid of owing him something so big, she affirmed, not as a question but as a statement. Emily nodded, surprised by the clarity with which her mother had identified the crux of the issue. I don't want to be one more in his collection of women he temporarily saved, she confessed. If I go to London, I want to do it on my own merits. And if our relationship is to survive, it must do so without that power imbalance. Susan squeezed her hand firmly, her eyes bright with pride. You've always been the most sensible in the family, she said with a smile. Your father and I will support you in whatever you decide, but I believe you're taking the right path. True love flourishes in equality, not in dependency. That night, in Michael's penthouse, Emily gathered the courage to communicate her decision to him. His reaction wasn't what she expected. Instead of being offended or trying to convince her, he remained silent for a long moment, observing her with an intensity that was almost painful. I understand why you're doing this, he said finally. And although my first impulse is to insist, I think I respect you too much to do so. He approached her slowly, taking her hands in his. But I have an alternative proposal, he continued. A compromise that might work for both of us. Emily held her breath, preparing to negotiate, but what Michael said next left her completely disarmed. Marry me. The words fell between them like stones in still water. Not out of convenience, not as a transaction. Marry me because I believe together we're better people than we'd ever be apart. Time seemed to stop. Emily felt the ground beneath her feet transforming into quicksand. Of all possible reactions, this was the only one she wasn't prepared for. Michael, she stammered, searching for words she couldn't find. Don't answer now, he interrupted gently. Think about it. And while you're thinking, I want to show you something tomorrow. Something I've been preparing without your knowledge. Curiosity added to the confusion in the emotional whirlwind that was Emily's mind. What could be so important as to present it as a response to her rejection of financial help? The marriage proposal was already sufficiently impactful on its own. That night, she barely slept, imagining possible futures that bifurcated before her like a labyrinth of mirrors. Each option reflected a different version of herself, and none seemed completely right or completely wrong. The decision she would make wouldn't only define her relationship with Michael, but also the woman she would become. The following morning dawned with a soft drizzle that blurred the contours of New York, converting the city into an impressionist watercolor of grays and diffuse greens. Emily followed Michael through the corridors of the Westchester mansion, a property she knew well after months of working with the collection, but which still held unexplored corners. They stopped before an antique oak door in the east wing, an area Emily had assumed was simply unused guest rooms. Michael took out an ornamental key from his pocket and inserted it into the lock, with a movement that denoted certain nervousness, improper of his usual confidence. What I'm going to show you is something personal, he said, hesitating for an instant before turning the key. No one else has seen this, not even Wilson. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing a spacious room illuminated by large windows that overlooked a seldom frequented interior garden. But it wasn't the space that left Emily breathless, but what it contained. It was a completely equipped art restoration studio. Work tables with specialized lighting, binocular microscopes, cabinets with pigments meticulously organized by chromatic range, precision tools, technical books in various languages, and a complete library on art history and conservation techniques. Emily couldn't articulate a coherent question as she surveyed the space with her gaze, recognizing equipment she had only seen in photographs of the best European restoration workshops. I began putting it together 3 months ago, explained Michael, observing her reaction attentively, after our conversation about your dreams of studying in London. I hired British specialists to advise me on every detail. Emily approached one of the tables, passing her fingers over the perfectly leveled surface. Next to it was an easel with an 18th-century canvas visibly damaged by time and humidity. "Is it a copy?" she asked, examining the painting with a critical eye. "It's original," Michael responded. "A minor Copley I bought at a private auction. It's documented, but in lamentable condition. I thought it could be a good project for you to practice on before London." Emily turned to him, overwhelmed by the implications of what she was seeing. "You did all this for me?" Michael approached slowly, vulnerability evident in his gaze. "I did it for us," he corrected gently. "My proposal is this. Accept whatever scholarship or loan you want to cover your tuition. Maintain your economic independence. But if you marry me, this space will be yours to develop your talent. You can practice here before you leave, and when you return from London, you can establish your own restoration workshop." It was an impossible offer to ignore. It not only represented an elegant solution to the dilemma that tormented her, but also demonstrated a level of commitment and understanding that Emily hadn't expected. "When were you going to show me this?" she asked, while her fingers traced a set of museum-quality sable brushes. "I don't know," Michael confessed. "I wanted it to be a surprise for when you made the decision about London, but your announcement last night accelerated things." He paused, observing her intensely. "Emily, I understand your fear of repeating past patterns, but this is different. I don't want to save you or convert you into one more trophy. I want to build a life with you, support your dreams while you help me reconnect with the person I stopped being long ago." Emily remained silent, absorbing not just his words, but also the profound meaning of the space he had created. It wasn't simply a grandiose gesture or an attempt to buy her with luxuries. It was tangible proof that he had listened to her, that he understood what really mattered to her. She approached the window, watching the rain that now fell harder on the interior garden. Her reflection in the glass returned the image of a woman at the crossroads of her life, holding in her hands a future she had never imagined possible. "If I say yes," she began, carefully choosing her words, "I need to know that this isn't just a romantic impulse that will fade with time. I need to know that I can go to London, and that you'll still be the same man when I return." Michael approached until he stood beside her, their reflections overlapping in the glass like a premonition of intertwined futures. "I can't promise I'll be exactly the same," he responded with honesty. "I hope to be better. What I can promise is that each day I'll work to deserve the opportunity you're giving me, to demonstrate that this isn't just another chapter in a repeated story, but the beginning of something completely new for both of us." Emily turned to look at him directly, searching in his eyes for any sign of doubt or falsity. What she found was only determination mixed with a fear that mirrored her own, the universal fear of betting one's heart and losing. "3 conditions," she said finally. "First, we'll sign a prenuptial agreement that protects my economic independence. Second, the wedding will be intimate, no media circuses. And third," she paused, taking a deep breath, "I want to meet your complete family, all your secrets, Michael, no more surprises." His expression tensed momentarily upon hearing the last condition, but he nodded with determination. "I accept your terms," he said solemnly. "All of them." The kiss that sealed that agreement tasted of promise and risk, of fear and hope. As the rain redoubled its intensity against the windows, Emily understood that she was taking the most courageous and terrifying decision of her life, choosing to believe that people can change, that patterns can be broken, that love, when it's true, can be both a refuge and a path to freedom. The upscale restaurant per se, hidden on the 4th floor of the Time Warner Center, perfectly represented the luxurious discretion that characterized the life Emily had begun to share with Michael. Immaculate linen tablecloths, crystalware that clinked with musical delicacy, and waiters who seemed to anticipate desires before they were expressed. It was the kind of place where important conversations occurred in low voices, protected by the calculated distance between tables. Emily nervously played with the engagement ring on her finger, an Art Deco piece with a central sapphire surrounded by small diamonds that had belonged to Michael's grandmother. They had been engaged for 3 weeks, and this dinner represented the fulfillment of one of her conditions. Meeting Michael's complete family, specifically his sister Sarah, the only close relative with whom he maintained a relationship. "Relax," Michael murmured, covering her hand with his. "Sarah will like you. "How can you be so sure?" Emily replied. "She'll probably think I'm an opportunist who took advantage of her older brother." Michael smiled with a certain sadness. "Sarah knows my history too well to be surprised. The difference is that this time she'll see something she's never seen before, that I'm genuinely in love." Before Emily could respond, an elegant woman entered the restaurant with the confidence of someone accustomed to being observed. At first glance, the family resemblance was evident. The same grey eyes, the same defined jawline, although in Sarah these features appeared softened by a deliberately cultivated femininity. She wore a burgundy-tailored suit that contrasted with her platinum blonde hair cut in a perfect bob. Michael rose to greet her, with an embrace that seemed simultaneously warm and formal, as if there were invisible protocols even between siblings. "Sarah, I'd like to introduce Emily Parker. Emily, my sister Sarah Thompson Hayes." The woman studied Emily with a penetrating gaze before extending her hand. "The famous art restorer," she said with a polite smile. "My brother talks of nothing else." The dinner began with the predictable tension of any first family meeting, but Sarah turned out to be surprisingly direct and lacking in pretensions for someone of her social position. She directed a foundation dedicated to the education of at-risk girls, work that spoke of values shared with Emily, despite their different origins. "So, how did you two meet exactly?" Sarah asked, as the waiter served the second course. "Michael has been deliberately vague about it." Emily looked at Michael, who nodded slightly, giving her the freedom to respond with honesty. "We met at the gallery where I worked," she explained. "He appeared 3 days in a row, supposedly interested in an exhibition that, frankly, was rather mediocre." Sarah let out a genuine laugh. Typical of Michael, not at all subtle. "And you? Did you fall head over heels for the charm of the great businessman immediately?" "Not at all," Emily responded with a smile. "I thought he was another bored rich man trying to impress the gallery girl. I resisted quite a bit." Sarah's expression became more serious, almost evaluative. "You know what? It's refreshing to hear the truth without filters. Most people Michael introduces to me tend to construct more convenient narratives." The rest of the dinner flowed with unexpected comfort. Sarah turned out to be a surprising ally, sharing childhood anecdotes that humanized Michael, and offered Emily glimpses of the boy he had been before becoming the powerful businessman. It was during dessert, a chocolate soufflé that melted in the mouth like a sweet cloud, when the conversation took an unexpected turn. "Has Michael told you about Nathan?" Sarah suddenly asked, carefully observing Emily's reaction. Emily frowned, confused. "Nathan?" A tense silence fell over the table. Michael had visibly paled, his jaw tense in an expression that Emily recognized as his mask of emotional control. "Sarah," he warned in a controlled voice, "now is not the time." "When will be the time then, Michael? The night before the wedding? After?" Sarah turned to Emily with an apologetic look mixed with determination. "Nathan is Michael's son. He's 15 years old and lives in Boston with his mother, Rebecca." The world seemed to stop around Emily. The conversations from nearby tables, the clinking of cutlery, even the soft background music, all faded into a dull buzz as she processed the information. Michael had a son, a teenage son whose existence he had deliberately hidden during all their time together. "Is it true?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Michael nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the wine glass as if he could find the right words there. "I was going to tell you," he said finally. "After the wedding, when things were more established, it's complicated." "It's always complicated with you, Michael," Sarah interrupted with a mixture of exasperation and fraternal affection. "But Emily deserves to know what family she's entering, especially because if all goes well, she'll eventually be Nathan's stepmother." Stepmother. The word fell like a stone in Emily's stomach, a role she had never considered, a responsibility for which she didn't feel prepared. And, most importantly, a fundamental part of Michael's life that he had kept hidden, despite his promise of total honesty. "I need a moment," Emily said, rising abruptly from the table. "Excuse me." In the elegant restaurant bathroom, Emily leaned against the cold marble of the sink, trying to recover her emotional balance. Her reflection in the mirror returned the image of someone halfway between the naive young woman she had been and the confident woman she was becoming. Questions piled up in her mind. Why had Michael hidden something so important? What other secrets was he keeping? Could she really trust a man who so carefully selected which parts of his life to share? Upon returning to the table, she found the siblings in the midst of a contained but intense discussion. They stopped immediately upon seeing her, and the regret on Michael's face was palpable. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I should have told you from the beginning." "Why didn't you?" Emily asked, maintaining her external calm despite the inner storm. Michael sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair, in a gesture of vulnerability he rarely showed in public. "Nathan and we barely have a relationship. Rebecca made sure of that after the divorce. It's been painful. So painful that sometimes I pretend that part of my life doesn't exist. It's easier that way." Emily studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or lies, but found only genuine shame and an old pain she recognized as authentic. "When was the last time you saw him?" she asked. 2 years ago, Michael responded after a moment. "On his 13th birthday, it was disastrous. He didn't want to see me. Rebecca had nurtured his resentment for years. I tried to maintain the connection, but eventually I gave up." The confession of defeat, so uncharacteristic of the Michael that Emily knew, revealed a vulnerability he had never shown. This wasn't the implacable businessman or the confident lover. This was a father who had failed and who carried the weight of that failure. "I need time to process this," Emily said finally. "I'm not saying it's an insurmountable impediment, but it changes things, Michael. It changes the image I had of our future." Sarah, who had remained unusually quiet, placed a hand on Emily's arm in a gesture of feminine solidarity. "Take all the time you need," she said gently, "but also consider that everyone deserves a second chance, even my brother with all his monumental mistakes." The return trip home transpired in a silence laden with tension. Emily looked out the car window as New York's lights paraded like shooting stars, each one representing possible futures that now seemed more complicated than ever. Michael respected her silence, but the anguish in his profile was evident even in the vehicle's half-light. That night, Emily didn't return to the Upper East Side apartment. She asked the driver to leave her at her old shared apartment, where fortunately she still kept keys and some belongings. She needed distance and perspective, a space to evaluate what this revelation really meant for her, for them. The decision she would make now wouldn't just affect her relationship with Michael, but also the life of a teenager she didn't even know, but who somehow already formed part of their intertwined destiny. The simplicity with which she had imagined their future had evaporated, revealing an emotional landscape much more complex than she had anticipated. Central Park bustled with life on that Sunday afternoon, families spreading blankets on the grass, couples strolling hand in hand, elderly people feeding pigeons, and Emily, alone on a bench facing the lake, watching the paddle boats that lazily glided over the water. 3 days had passed since the revelation at Per Se, 3 days of self-imposed silence in which she had rejected Michael's calls, needing space to order her thoughts. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from Sarah, surprisingly. "Could we meet? There are things about Nathan you should know, only if you're ready, no pressure." The offer awakened her curiosity. Sarah, despite the abrupt way in which she had revealed Michael's secret, seemed genuinely concerned for the well-being of all involved. After a moment of doubt, Emily responded affirmatively. An hour later, they met at a hidden tea house in Greenwich Village. The place, with its Japanese teapots and colorful cushions, created an intimate atmosphere that invited confidences. "Thank you for coming," Sarah began, stirring her jasmine tea. "I wanted to talk to you without Michael's presence, because there are things he would never tell you, not because he wants to deceive you, but because he isn't even capable of seeing the situation clearly." Emily nodded, appreciating the frankness. "Why did you decide to tell me during dinner?" she asked directly. "You could have mentioned it to me privately, prepared me." Sarah sighed, passing a hand through her hair in a gesture that surprisingly reminded Emily of Michael. "Because I know Michael. He's always waiting for the right time, which conveniently never arrives when it comes to uncomfortable truths." She paused, carefully choosing her next words. "I didn't want you to find yourself in the same situation as his ex-wives, discovering essential parts of his life when it's already too late to make informed decisions." The brutal honesty was refreshing, although painful. "Tell me about Nathan," Emily asked. During the next hour, Sarah unraveled the complicated family history. Nathan was born during Michael's second marriage. The first years had been relatively happy, but when the boy was 5, the marriage began to crumble. Rebecca, feeling abandoned by Michael's constant work absences, began an extramarital relationship. When Michael discovered it, the divorce was inevitable and bitter. What Michael will never admit is that he was already emotionally absent long before Rebecca's infidelity, Sarah explained. He's always been that way. He immerses himself in work when emotions become too intense or complicated. It's his defense mechanism since childhood. And the custody? Emily asked. Officially shared, but in practice, Sarah made a gesture of helplessness. Rebecca moved to Boston with Nathan. She did everything possible to make visits difficult. Last-minute plan changes, the child's sudden illnesses, non-postponable extracurricular activities during the weekends that corresponded to Michael. She took a sip of tea before continuing. And Michael, instead of fighting for his son, gradually surrendered. Each rejection, each frustrated visit, each unanswered call was a wound. Eventually, he built the same wall he uses to protect himself from everything else. Emily processed the information, reconstructing the image of Michael with these new puzzle pieces. It didn't justify his silence, but at least it contextualized it. Have you seen Nathan recently? She asked. 6 months ago, Sarah nodded. He's in that typical rebellious adolescent phase, but he's a good kid. Intelligent, sensitive beneath that facade of indifference. He resembles Michael a lot at his age, though he doesn't want to see it. The conversation drifted to more personal territories. Sarah shared stories from her childhood with Michael, of an emotionally distant father, and a mother who compensated for her husband's coldness with overprotection. She spoke of how Michael, being the eldest, had assumed from early on the role of heir to the family empire, carrying expectations that had molded his personality. I'm not excusing his mistakes, Sarah clarified. God knows he's made many, but there's context to understand why he is the way he is, and also why you're different from all the other women in his life. Different how? Emily asked, not entirely convinced. You're the first who really sees him, beyond the facade. The first who demands not just his money or his last name, but authenticity. Sarah looked at her directly. And most importantly, you're the first with whom he's shared his fears. That, coming from my brother, is practically a declaration of absolute vulnerability. As they said goodbye, Sarah gave her a photograph she had taken from her purse. It's recent, she said, from last summer, at a sailing camp. I thought you should at least know his face. Emily observed the image of a dark-haired teenager, with eyes identical to Michael's, smiling uncomfortably at the camera while holding a sports trophy. In his posture, there was a familiar mixture of pride and reserve that she immediately recognized. Thank you, she murmured, placing the photograph in her bag. For everything. That night, Emily returned to the Upper East Side apartment. She found Michael on the terrace, contemplating New York's skyline with a glass of whiskey in hand and an expression of absolute exhaustion. Upon seeing her, he abruptly incorporated surprise and relief evident on his face. You came back, he said simply. To talk, she qualified. Just that for now. They sat facing each other, the glass table between them like a symbolic border. Emily took out Nathan's photograph and placed it on the polished surface. Sarah gave it to me today, she explained. She also told me everything about your divorce, the custody, how you gradually drifted away. Michael observed the image of his son with a mixture of pain and nostalgia that he didn't try to hide. I suppose you think even worse of me now, he murmured. This isn't about judging you, Michael, Emily responded gently. It's about understanding what I'm getting into, what kind of family we're building. A son isn't a minor detail that you can casually mention after the wedding. He nodded slowly, accepting the justice of her words. What do you want to know? He asked, willing for the first time to speak openly about the topic. Everything, she responded simply, and this time no filters, no convenient omissions. During the following hours, Michael opened the floodgates of his past, speaking with a raw honesty that was almost painful to witness. He recounted how he had genuinely loved Rebecca at the beginning, how Nathan's birth had been simultaneously marvelous and terrifying, how, faced with the responsibility of being a father, he had resorted to work as a refuge, unconsciously repeating the pattern of his own father. He described the downward spiral of the marriage, the failed attempts at reconnection, the devastation of discovering the infidelity, the divorce that became a war where Nathan was both the prize and the victim. The worst wasn't losing Rebecca, he confessed. It was realizing, too late, that I was losing my son day by day. Each visit was more difficult than the previous. Nathan saw me as a stranger, sometimes even as the enemy. Rebecca had told him her version of the story, and I didn't know how to counter it without turning a child into the arbiter of our problems. His voice broke when reaching the most painful part. How, gradually, he had stopped fighting, convincing himself that it was better for Nathan to have stability with his mother than the constant drama of shared custody. "The last time I saw him was a disaster," he murmured, looking at the photograph with moist eyes. "I had organized a complete weekend, tickets to Yankee Stadium, reservations at his favorite restaurant, plans to go to the amusement park. He spent the whole time with headphones on, responding with monosyllables. In the end, he directly asked me when he could return to his mother. That's when I completely surrendered." Emily listened without interrupting, allowing him to unravel years of guilt and silent regret. When he finally finished, the silence between them was laden not with judgment but with possibilities. "If you could change things," she asked finally, "would you?" "In an instant," he responded without hesitation, "but I don't know how. Years have passed, Emily. He probably hates me, and rightly so." Emily took his hand for the first time since her return, feeling the almost imperceptible tremor that ran through it. "Then maybe you need help," she said softly. "Maybe you need someone who isn't burdened by history, someone who can see solutions where you only see walls." Understanding slowly illuminated Michael's eyes. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm not promising miracles," Emily clarified. "But if we're going to build a future together, that future must include Nathan. Not as an obligation, but as an opportunity. For him, for you, for all of us." Michael looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and renewed hope, as if seeing for the first time a possible path through a labyrinth he had considered impenetrable. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "It's not about deserving," Emily responded. "It's about growing together, about learning to be better than we were. And that includes you learning to be the father that Nathan needs, even if the path is difficult." That night, as New York slept beneath a blanket of stars barely visible through the light pollution, Emily and Michael began to rewrite the future they imagined together. A future more complicated than what they had initially dreamed, but also potentially richer and fuller. A future that included not just their intertwined dreams, but also the possibility of healing wounds that had seemed definitive. The wedding was still on, but now with a deeper purpose than romantic love, the creation of a real family with all its complexities and challenges. And Emily, who had never imagined becoming a stepmother, discovered in herself an unbreakable determination to help restore what seemed irreparably damaged, applying to human relationships the same patience and care she dedicated to works of art deteriorated by time. Boston displayed its particular New England beauty under a spring sun that made the facades of brownstone buildings gleam and warmed the centuries-old stones of the historic district. Emily walked nervously along the harbor, occasionally checking the address on her phone. Each step brought her closer to a meeting she had carefully planned over the last few weeks, without Michael's knowledge. Finally, she reached her destination, a cafe with a terrace facing the harbor. The place buzzed with activity, tourists and locals mingling in a symphony of languages and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Emily scanned the tables until she located the woman she was looking for. Chestnut hair gathered in an elegant bun, designer sunglasses, and a posture that denoted confidence and a certain wariness. "Rebecca Collins," she asked, approaching the table. "I'm Emily Parker. Thank you for agreeing to see me." The woman removed her sunglasses, revealing evaluative dark eyes that studied Emily from head to toe. "I admit curiosity won over prudence," she responded with a barely perceptible Boston accent. "It's not every day that my ex-husband's fiancée requests a private meeting." Emily sat across from her, thanking the waiter, who immediately approached to take her order. An espresso, she needed the caffeine to maintain mental clarity. "I appreciate your frankness," she said when the waiter moved away, "and I want to offer you the same. I'm here for Nathan." Rebecca visibly tensed, her expression transforming into a mixture of maternal protection and suspicion. "Nathan is perfectly fine without Michael's intervention in his life," she responded coldly, "and by extension, without yours." Emily breathed deeply, aware that she was navigating extremely turbulent waters. I'm not here to judge the past or to force any situation, she clarified. I just want to understand, from your perspective, what really happened. Michael has told me his version, but I know there are at least two sides to every story. Surprise fleetingly crossed Rebecca's face before she recovered her composure. Michael talked about Nathan. That is a novelty, she commented with a certain acidity. Normally he prefers to pretend he doesn't exist, except for the monthly bank transfers, of course. Things are changing, Emily responded gently. And part of that change involves recognizing past mistakes. During the next hour, Rebecca detailed her version of the story. She spoke of how they had met at a charity event, of the vertiginous romance, of the marriage that seemed straight out of a fairy tale, of how everything began to crumble with Nathan's birth, not because they didn't love the boy, but because Michael seemed incapable of balancing his role as a father with his professional ambitions. She described nights awake with a sick baby, while Michael was on business trips, birthdays celebrated days later because an important meeting couldn't be postponed, broken promises that accumulated like cracks in the foundations of their marriage. It doesn't justify my infidelity, Rebecca admitted with surprising honesty. That was my mistake, my weakness. But the marriage was already dead long before I sought consolation elsewhere. Emily listened attentively, recognizing patterns that Michael had begun to admit in their recent conversations. And after the divorce, she asked. Michael says he tried to maintain contact with Nathan, but that gradually it became impossible. Rebecca let out a short laugh, devoid of humor. He says that? She shook her head. Typical of Michael, rewriting history to come off as the victim. Yes, at the beginning he religiously complied with the visits. He would appear with extravagant gifts, grandiose plans, trying to buy Nathan's affection instead of earning it with quality time. She paused, her expression softening slightly as she remembered. The problem wasn't that I made visits difficult. The problem was that Michael never learned to be a father. He only knew how to be a provider. Nathan needed emotional connection, not another expensive video game or a vacation at Disney World. He needed his father to ask him about his fears, his dreams, his friends, things Michael considered trivial compared to his important business. Emily nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation better and better. And now, she asked, how is Nathan? What does he think of his father? A shadow of sadness crossed Rebecca's face. Nathan is at that difficult age. 15 years old, everything seems unfair to him. Everything is drama and conflict. She sighed deeply. Regarding Michael, there's resentment, of course, but there are also unanswered questions, a void that all the sporting and academic achievements can't fill. Do you think he might be open to reconnecting? Emily asked, getting to the heart of the matter. Not all at once, of course. Gradually, on his terms. Rebecca studied her with renewed attention, as if trying to determine her true intentions. Why does this matter so much to you? She finally asked. You could simply enjoy your relationship with Michael without complicating it with the ghosts of his past. The question was fair, and Emily took a moment to formulate an honest response. Because I believe in the possibility of repair, she said finally. In my work as an art restorer, I constantly see how pieces that appear ruined can recover their beauty with patience and appropriate techniques. Human relationships aren't so different. She paused, carefully choosing her next words. And because if I'm going to join my life with Michael's, I want it to be a complete life, not a sanitized version that excludes painful or inconvenient parts. Something changed in Rebecca's gaze, a flash of reluctant respect. You're not what I expected, she admitted. When I received your message, I imagined another young woman dazzled by wealth and status, as I myself once was. But you have substance. Emily smiled slightly, accepting the unexpected compliment. So, do you think it would be possible? A first step, perhaps? Rebecca considered the question for a long moment, distractedly playing with the spoon in her now cold coffee. I promise nothing, she said finally, but I'll talk to Nathan. I'll ask if he would be willing to receive a letter from his father. A real letter, handwritten, not an impersonal email or a WhatsApp message, something that demonstrates genuine effort. It's more than I expected, Emily responded with sincere gratitude. Thank you. As they said goodbye, Rebecca detained her a moment more, her hand on Emily's arm like a slight anchor. Some advice, from woman to woman, she said in a low voice. Michael has the capacity to make you feel like the only important person in the universe when you're with him. It's a natural gift, but he also has the same facility for forgetting your existence when you're out of his sight. Don't make my mistake. Establish firm boundaries from the beginning. Emily nodded, thanking her for the warning that resonated with her own observations and the precautions she had already begun to implement in her relationship. That night, in her hotel room with views of Boston Harbor, Emily called Michael. The emotion in his voice as she told him about the meeting was palpable, mixed with a comprehensible anxiety. "Do you really think it will work?" he asked after a long silence. "That Nathan might give me another chance?" "I don't know," Emily responded honestly, "but we'll never know if we don't try. The letter is a first step. It has to be sincere, vulnerable, without expectations. You're not writing to obtain immediate forgiveness, but to open a door that has been closed for too long." "I don't know if I'll know what to say," Michael confessed, his usual confidence dissipated by the fear of rejection. "Then first, write what you really feel without filters," Emily suggested. "Then we can review it together, find the appropriate words that are honest but also respectful of his space." The conversation continued well into the night, navigating between hopes, fears, and concrete plans. For the first time since she had known Michael, Emily felt him completely present, without distractions, without the part of his mind always occupied with transactions and commercial strategies. It was as if the businessman had temporarily ceded control to the father, to the man who dared to dream of a reconciliation that until now had seemed impossible. Before hanging up, Michael said something that was engraved on Emily's heart. "Thank you for not settling for the incomplete version of myself that I was willing to offer. Thank you for demanding more, for believing I could be more." As Boston Harbor whispered against the coast and the city's lights drew artificial constellations in the night, Emily understood that she was witnessing and participating in something extraordinary. The reconstruction not just of a fragmented family, but also of the man she had decided to love, with all his imperfections and possibilities. The restoration studio in Westchester, illuminated by the warm afternoon light filtering through the tall windows, had become Emily's preferred refuge. As she meticulously worked on cleaning a 17th-century canvas, her thoughts constantly drifted to the letter that Michael had spent all week writing and rewriting for Nathan. A soft knock on the door interrupted her concentration. Michael entered, holding a thick cream-colored envelope in his hand. His expression was a mixture of determination and vulnerability that Emily had come to value deeply. "I finished it," he said simply, extending the envelope toward her. "Could you—" "Of course," Emily responded, carefully cleaning her hands before taking the letter. "Are you sure you want me to read it?" He nodded, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that revealed his nervousness. "I need to know if it sounds sincere, if it conveys what I really feel without sounding manipulative or superficial." Emily opened the envelope and unfolded 2 handwritten sheets, with Michael's elegant but slightly trembling handwriting. As she read, she felt she was witnessing an act of courage uncommon for a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life and relationships. The letter began with a direct apology for the years of absence. Michael explicitly acknowledged his responsibility in the deterioration of the relationship, without blaming Rebecca or the circumstances. He shared specific memories of moments with Nathan when he was small, afternoons in the park, reading bedtime stories, a specific afternoon building a sandcastle at a Cape Cod beach. He expressed regret for all the lost occasions, for the birthdays he arrived late to or didn't attend at all, for the school competitions he missed because of irreplaceable meetings that, in retrospect, could have been postponed. Most impacting was the vulnerability with which Michael exposed his own fears. His fear of not knowing how to be a father, of repeating the patterns of emotional coldness he had experienced with his own father, of being rejected if he showed how much he really cared. The letter ended not with a request for immediate forgiveness, but with a simple offer, the possibility of beginning again, at a pace Nathan would decide, without pressures or excessive expectations. When Emily finished reading, she found Michael looking at her expectantly, more insecure than she had ever seen him. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "It's honest, vulnerable, and respectful. You give space for his feelings without evading your responsibility." The relief on Michael's face was palpable. "Do you really think so? I rewrote each paragraph at least 10 times. The effort shows, Emily assured him, returning the letter. But not through the perfection of the words, rather through the authenticity they convey. Nathan will feel that too. That same afternoon, they sent the letter by courier to Boston, initiating a waiting period that proved to be a test of patience for both. Michael, accustomed to immediate responses in his business world, found the uncertainty particularly difficult. Emily observed him compulsively checking his phone, hoping for some sign, some response that might never come. 2 weeks later, when hope was beginning to fade, the unexpected happened. A text message appeared on Michael's phone during dinner. The name on the screen made both of them hold their breath. Nathan. The message was brief, almost cryptic. I got your letter. We can talk by video call on Saturday at 6 p.m. if that works for you. Just 15 minutes. Michael looked at Emily with a mixture of panic and hope. What should I reply? The truth, she responded gently. That you'll be available at the time he proposes, and that you appreciate the opportunity. Saturday arrived with the torturous slowness of anticipation. Emily had suggested not being present during the call to give them privacy, but Michael had insisted she stay, at least in the adjoining room, needing her silent support. At 5:55 p.m., Michael was already seated in his office, facing the computer screen, nervously adjusting his shirt and the camera angle. Emily gave him a kiss on the cheek and discreetly withdrew to the corner armchair, far enough not to be visible on camera, but close enough to transmit her presence. At 6 p.m. sharp, the video call began. Nathan's face appeared on the screen, so similar to Michael's that it was almost painful. The same grey eyes, the same jawline, although softened by youth. His expression was cautious, a mixture of curiosity and reserve. Hello, Nathan. Michael's voice sounded strangled by emotion. Thank you for calling. Mom insisted, the teenager responded with brutal frankness. She said I should at least listen to you. The comment could have been a devastating blow, but Michael received it with a serenity that surprised Emily. I'm grateful to her for that, he responded simply, and to you for accepting. The initial conversation was awkward, punctuated by silences and monosyllabic responses. Michael asked about school, about his friends, about the sailing team Nathan competed on according to what Rebecca had mentioned. The teenager responded with short phrases, clearly wary, but not openly hostile. Gradually, however, something began to change. When Michael mentioned remembering how Nathan, as a child, had always loved the sea and boats, something briefly lit up in the boy's eyes. I placed second in the regional championship last month, he offered unexpectedly. Almost qualified for nationals. That's incredible. The surprise and pride in Michael's voice were impossible to fake. I'd like to see you compete sometime if it would be okay with you. Nathan shrugged, but Emily noticed his posture had relaxed slightly. The regattas are open to the public, he responded, a small opening that Michael immediately seized. When is the next one? The conversation drifted to safer territory, sailing, competitions, the technical characteristics of different boats. It was a shared interest neither knew they had in common. Michael mentioned he had sailed in his youth, and for the first time Nathan seemed genuinely interested, asking questions about types of boats and maritime conditions that Michael answered with evident knowledge. The 15 minutes extended to 20, then to 30. Finally, Nathan looked at his watch and murmured that he had to go. He had plans with friends. Of course, certainly, Michael responded quickly. Thank you for your time. It was really good to see you. Nathan nodded, his expression now more contemplative than hostile. Your letter, he began, as if searching for the right words. It was different from what I expected. Different how? Michael asked, visibly holding his breath. It seemed like you. Not the you from the birthday congratulation emails that your assistant probably wrote. It seemed like you. He paused, carefully choosing his next words. There's a regatta in 2 weeks at Boston Harbor. If you want to come, I guess that would be okay. The invitation, as cautious as it was significant, hung between them like a fragile but real bridge. I'd love that, Michael responded, struggling to maintain his composure. I'll be there. After ending the call, Michael remained motionless in front of the screen, as if fearing any movement might break the spell of what had just happened. Emily approached silently, placing a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of support. It went well, she said softly. Better than I dared hope, Michael confessed, his voice broken by contained emotion. When he mentioned sailing, it's like we found a common language after years of speaking different languages. Emily knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. It's just the beginning, she said gently. There will be advances and setbacks. The important thing is that the door is open. Thank you, Michael murmured, squeezing her hands, for pushing me to do this, for believing it was possible when I had given up long ago. That night, as they shared a simple dinner on the terrace under a starry sky, the atmosphere between them had changed. There was a lightness in Michael that Emily had never witnessed, as if an invisible weight he had carried for years was finally beginning to lift. He wasn't naive about the road ahead. Reconnecting with a resentful teenage son would require patience, constancy, and humility. But for the first time, that road seemed walkable, not an impossible fantasy. Emily observed this transformation with a mixture of joy and reflection. The man she had met in the Soho gallery, so self-assured in his world of privileges, was learning to navigate the much more complex and rewarding territory of authentic human connections. And in that process, she too was changing, discovering facets of herself she didn't know existed, a capacity to heal not just damaged art, but also broken relationships. The first step had been taken. The bridge they had begun to build was fragile, but real, and although the future remained uncertain, for the first time it seemed full of possibilities that went beyond the individual dreams each had harbored. They were creating something new together, not just a relationship, but a family in the deepest and most complex sense of the word. The sea breeze of Boston Harbor caressed Emily's face as she observed the frantic activity at the marina. Multicolored sails dotted the Atlantic horizon like confetti against the intense blue, while competitors and technicians busied themselves with the final preparations for the youth regatta. Beside her, Michael remained tense, constantly scanning the crowd in search of Nathan. "Relax," Emily murmured, gently squeezing his hand. "He'll come." Michael nodded, though anxiety remained visible in every line of his face. They had arrived in Boston the night before, deliberately staying at a simple hotel near the harbor, avoiding the grand luxuries Michael normally preferred. It was part of a conscious effort to present himself to Nathan not as the powerful businessman, but simply as a father trying to reconnect. "There he is," Michael suddenly exclaimed, pointing toward a group of teenagers dressed in the local yacht club's colors. Nathan stood out among them, taller than most of his companions, concentrated on adjusting something on his equipment. He hadn't seen them yet, and Emily noticed how Michael hesitated about whether to approach or wait. "Go," she gently encouraged him. "I'll wait here." With faltering steps, so improper of his usual confidence, Michael approached the competitors' area. Emily observed him greeting Nathan, the exchange visibly awkward even at a distance. There were no hugs, just a quick handshake, but the fact that the teenager didn't reject his father's presence was already a victory. After a few minutes of apparently technical conversation, with Nathan pointing to parts of his boat, the boy looked in Emily's direction with evident curiosity. Michael made a gesture inviting her to approach. "Nathan, this is Emily," he introduced when she reached his side. "Emily, this is my son, Nathan." The "my son" sounded simultaneously proud and cautious on his lips, like relearning an almost forgotten language. "Hello, Nathan," Emily greeted with a warm but not excessive smile. "Your father told me you're impressive at this sailing thing." The teenager studied her with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "Do you know anything about sailing?" he asked directly. "Absolutely nothing," Emily confessed with a genuine laugh. "But I'm here to learn. Maybe you can explain the basics to me so I understand what I'm seeing." The honesty seemed to work. Nathan sketched a small smile, the first they had seen from him, and proceeded to briefly explain the fundamentals of the competition. Categories, scoring, basic strategies. His passion for the sport was evident in how his eyes lit up when talking about currents and navigation techniques. A whistle interrupted the explanation, calling the competitors to their positions. "I have to go," Nathan said, suddenly nervous. "The competition is about to start." "We'll be cheering for you," Michael responded with contained enthusiasm. "Good luck, though you probably don't need it." Something indefinable crossed Nathan's face, an emotion Emily couldn't interpret, but that seemed important. The boy nodded briefly, and ran to join his teammates. During the following hours, Emily and Michael followed the competition from the dock, identifying Nathan's sail among the others. The teenager proved to be genuinely talented, sailing with a mixture of precise technique and natural intuition. When he crossed the finish line in second place in his category, Michael couldn't contain a cheer that made several nearby spectators smile sympathetically. The award ceremony was brief but emotional. Nathan, on the podium with his silver medal, scanned the crowd until he found his father. For an instant, their gazes crossed, and the boy sketched a timid smile. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, not even close, but it was an acknowledgement of presence, a small bridge extended over years of absence. After the ceremony, Rebecca appeared among the crowd, as elegant as Emily remembered from their meeting at the cafe. The tension was immediate when she saw Michael, but it dissipated slightly upon observing the evident emotion on her ex-husband's face. "Congratulations," Michael said formally. "You've raised an exceptional sailor." Rebecca nodded, accepting the compliment with dignity. "Nathan has asked if you might join us at the club's celebration," she said finally, "if you don't have other plans." The surprise on Michael's face was evident. "We'd love to," Emily responded quickly, before emotion prevented Michael from speaking. The celebration turned out to be an informal barbecue at the yacht club facilities, with teenagers and families mingling in a relaxed atmosphere. Nathan moved primarily among his companions, but occasionally approached where Michael, Emily, and Rebecca were seated, sharing anecdotes about the competition or introducing a friend. At one point, when Nathan had moved away again, Rebecca looked directly at Emily. "Thank you," she said simply, "for your visit to Boston, for the letter, for all of this. I didn't think it would be possible." "I just facilitated communication," Emily responded. "The credit belongs to them for being willing to try." Rebecca smiled slightly, with a wisdom born of experience. Sometimes you need someone external to see possibilities that those directly involved can't imagine. She looked at Michael, who was animatedly conversing with a sailing instructor. "I've never seen him like this with Nathan. So, present." As the sun began to sink into the Atlantic, painting the sky in oranges and purples, Nathan approached with an unexpected proposal. "There's an exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts about art and technology," he said, addressing mainly Emily, although including Michael in his gaze. "A friend's father is one of the artists. I thought maybe, if you're staying tomorrow in Boston, we could go." The invitation, so casual in appearance but so significant in substance, momentarily left Michael speechless. It was Emily who responded, "We'd love to. In fact, we don't need to return to New York until Monday." "Cool," Nathan responded with studied teenage indifference that barely concealed the moment's importance. "We can meet there at 11. That night, in the hotel room, Michael seemed to float on a cloud of hopeful disbelief. "I can't believe he was the one who proposed seeing us tomorrow," he repeated, as if needing to confirm it hadn't been a dream. "And he chose something related to you, to art." Emily smiled, moved by the vulnerability Michael showed, so different from the public image of the implacable businessman. "He's extending bridges, Michael. In his way, on his terms, but he's trying. Do you really think we have a chance? To be a family, I mean," he asked, doubt and hope intertwined in his voice. Emily considered the question carefully. "I believe we're creating that possibility day by day," she responded finally. "It won't be like in the movies, with dramatic reconciliations and teary embraces. It will be slow, with advances and setbacks. But yes, I think there's a real opportunity." The visit to the Museum of Fine Arts the next day was revealing on multiple levels. Nathan turned out to be surprisingly knowledgeable about contemporary art, an interest he had recently developed that created an unexpected common ground with Emily. As they toured the exhibition, conversation flowed more naturally than ever, with Nathan asking about techniques and Emily explaining restoration concepts that fascinated the teenager. Michael observed this interaction with a mixture of joy and a touch of melancholy, as if witnessing the connection he himself still struggled to establish. At one point, while Nathan and Emily animatedly discussed an interactive installation, he approached them with a proposal. "What would you think about coming to New York sometime?" he asked, addressing Nathan, but including Emily in his gaze as silent support. "Emily has established a restoration studio at home. You might be interested in seeing it." Nathan considered the invitation with a seriousness beyond his years. "Maybe," he responded finally. "I have school vacation in 3 weeks. Perhaps then." It wasn't a definitive yes, but neither was it a rejection. It was a possibility, a door ajar to a future they were just beginning to imagine together. The return trip to New York was quiet, both processing the weekend's events. The relationship between father and son was far from repaired, but they had established a starting point, a foundation upon which to gradually build. What neither expected was the call they received a week later. Rebecca, with a tense voice trying to maintain calm, explained that Nathan had had a serious confrontation at school. Nothing legally serious, just a fight with another student, but enough for a 3-day suspension. "He's going through a difficult time," she explained. "Adolescence, changes, and now all this reconnection with you. It's a lot to process." "What can I do?" Michael asked, concern evident in his voice. Rebecca's response left them both perplexed. "He wants to come to New York earlier than planned. He says he needs space from Boston, from school, from everything. Normally I wouldn't yield after such behavior, but—" Her voice softened. "I think he really needs this, Michael. He needs time with his father." Preparations were made quickly. Nathan would arrive by train on Friday afternoon for a 4-day stay. Emily immersed herself in preparing a room for him in Westchester, trying to balance coziness with non-childishness, respecting that he was a teenager with his own tastes and preferences. When the moment finally arrived, Michael insisted on going to the station alone, a significant step in rebuilding his one-on-one relationship with Nathan. Emily waited at home, preparing an informal dinner that respected the tastes Rebecca had conveyed. Pasta, avoiding mushrooms, preference for chocolate desserts. The sound of the car in the driveway announced their arrival. Emily breathed deeply, aware that the coming days could be crucial in forming this new family dynamic. As she went out to greet them, she observed father and son walking together from the car. Not exactly comfortable, but not complete strangers either. They were talking about something that seemed to interest both of them, their profiles so similar, silhouetted against the New York sunset. In that instant, Emily had a deep certainty. They were witnessing the birth of something fragile, but potentially beautiful. A family not defined by blood or legal obligations, but deliberately built on foundations of honesty, effort, and the courage to try to repair what seemed irreparably broken. The road would be long and not always easy, but as Nathan raised his gaze and greeted her with a timid but genuine gesture, Emily felt that the winds were definitely changing in their favor. Time acquired a different rhythm in the following weeks. Nathan's visit, initially planned for 4 days, extended to a full week after conversations between Michael and Rebecca. What began as a temporary escape from problems in Boston gradually transformed into a period of mutual discovery and rebuilding of trust. Emily observed with fascination the evolution of the dynamic between father and son. The first days were tense, marked by careful conversations and spaces of uncomfortable silence. But gradually, small moments of connection began to emerge. A chess match after dinner, a conversation about books they had both read, a shared breakfast early before Emily woke up. The turning point came on the 4th day, when Emily invited Nathan to her restoration studio. The teenager had shown curiosity, but a certain reticence, as if afraid to show too much interest in something that clearly mattered to the adults of the house. However, once inside the naturally lit space surrounded by tools, pigments, and antique canvases, something changed in his attitude. "Is this what you do all day?" he asked, examining a binocular microscope with curiosity. "A large part of the day," Emily confirmed. "Each work has its own challenges, its own history hidden beneath layers of time and deterioration. Can I see how it works?" The request was almost timid, so different from the defiant attitude he sometimes showed. Emily smiled, bringing a stool for him. "I'm working on this small 18th century portrait," she explained, pointing to an oil painting showing a young woman with an elaborate hairstyle. Someone in the 19th century decided to improve it by adding elements that weren't in the original work. My job is to undo that intervention and recover the artist's original intention. During the following hours, Nathan remained fascinated beside Emily, observing the meticulous process of removing layers of yellowed varnish and inappropriate retouches. He asked intelligent questions, showed surprising patience for his age, and eventually, when Emily offered him the chance to try a small cleaning in a safe area, revealed a surprisingly steady hand. "You have a natural talent for this," Emily commented, genuinely impressed. "Most beginners apply too much pressure or are too timid. You found the exact balance on the first try." Nathan's face lit up with the compliment, a genuine smile he rarely showed. "Do you think I could learn more?" he asked. "During my stay, I mean?" "I'd love to teach you the basics," Emily responded. "If you're really interested, we could establish small daily sessions." What began as a casual activity quickly transformed into a routine. Each afternoon after Nathan spent time with Michael, visiting Yankee Stadium, touring New York, or simply conversing in the garden, he joined Emily in the studio for what they began to call Restoration Hour. Michael sometimes observed them from the door, an expression of amazement mixed with gratitude on his face as he watched his son and his fiancée forge their own special bond. One afternoon, as they worked together cleaning a gilded frame, Nathan spoke of something he had clearly been considering for some time. "Emily, can I ask you something personal?" His tone was cautious. "Of course," she responded, maintaining her attention on the delicate work to avoid making him uncomfortable with a direct look. "Why are you with my father?" The question came out hurriedly, as if he had been containing it. "I mean, you're young, talented, and well, you know how he is." Emily paused her work, carefully considering how to respond to this loaded question. "Your father is a complex man," she began slowly. "When I met him, I saw first what everyone sees: success, confidence, power. But over time, I discovered the parts he keeps hidden: vulnerability, regret, capacity for change." She looked directly at Nathan. "I fell in love not with the perfect version he presents to the world, but with the imperfect one who struggles to be better." Nathan assimilated her words in silence, his hands mechanically continuing the cleaning work. "He was different before," he said finally. "When I was little, before the divorce, I remember moments, not many but some, when he seemed really happy, really present. Then everything changed." "People aren't static, Nathan," Emily responded gently. "They change, they get lost sometimes, and hopefully they find their way back. Your father was lost for a while, but he's finding his way back. Partly thanks to you." "To me?" The surprise in his voice was palpable. "Reconnecting with you has transformed him in ways he doesn't even fully understand yet," Emily explained. "I see it every day, more reflective, more aware of what really matters. Less obsessed with control and more open to vulnerability." Nathan remained silent for a long moment, absorbing what he had heard. Finally, with a maturity surprising for his 15 years, he said something that became engraved on Emily's heart. "It's like what we do here, isn't it? Restoration. Not just of art, but of people, of relationships. Removing added layers that don't belong, recovering what was always underneath." The analogy was so perfect, so deeply insightful, that Emily felt a lump in her throat. "Exactly like that," she confirmed with an emotional voice. "The difference is that people are much more complicated than paintings. The process is slower, less predictable. But possible," Nathan added, and there was hope in his statement. "Definitely possible," Emily confirmed. When the time came for Nathan to return to Boston, the change was evident to everyone. The initial tension had given way to a cautious comfort. It wasn't a perfectly restored father-son relationship, but the foundations were firmly established. The teenager said goodbye with promises to return soon, specifically mentioning that he wanted to continue learning restoration techniques with Emily and, surprisingly, planning a sailing excursion with Michael at a beach near New York. In the privacy of their room that night, after Nathan had left on the train back to Boston, Michael embraced Emily with an intensity that conveyed more than any words. "You created a bridge," he murmured against her hair, "between him and me, between the past and the future. I don't know how to thank you." Emily pulled back slightly to look him in the eyes. "I didn't do it for gratitude," she responded gently. "I did it because I believe in second chances, in the possibility of repair. Deep down, we all deserve the chance to rebuild what was broken." As they prepared for bed, Emily reflected on the journey they had undertaken together. When she met Michael in the Soho gallery, she never would have imagined that she would end up not just falling in love with him, but helping him reconnect with parts of himself he had buried under years of emotional defenses. And although the wedding was now scheduled for after her stay in London, She felt they had already formed something much deeper than a formal commitment, a chosen family, built on honesty and shared effort. The acceptance letters for her program in London had arrived the previous week. In 2 months she would leave for a 9-month stay that would test not just her professional skills, but also the solidity of what they were building. But now, unlike when the idea first arose, she didn't fear the separation. She knew that what she would return to find would be even stronger than what she was leaving behind. The last afternoon before her departure for London, while packing her final belongings, Emily received an unexpected package. It was a flat box carefully wrapped with a handwritten note. "So you don't forget why it's worth returning." Then, upon opening it, she found a framed drawing, a surprisingly skillful representation of the restoration studio, with her and Michael seated by the window, observing the garden. Nathan's artistic talent was evident, but even more impactful was the implicit message. He saw them as a unit, as something valuable, as a family. Emily carefully placed the drawing among her most precious belongings, next to the acceptance letter from London and the engagement ring she would wear on a chain around her neck during her stay in England. These objects represented the constellation of her new life: professional passion, mature love, and newly discovered family bonds. As she closed her suitcase, she felt a deep certainty. She would return not just as a more skilled restorer, but as part of a story of repair much broader than any canvas she might work on in London. A story of restored hearts, of bridges extended over abysses of misunderstanding, of second chances seized with courage. The night before her departure, Michael, Nathan, who had insisted on coming to New York to say goodbye to her, and she dined together on the terrace under the stars. It wasn't a traditional family by any concept, but there was an authenticity in their connection that no convention could equal. As they toasted to her journey, Emily understood that the true masterpiece wasn't in any museum she would visit in London, but right there in the bonds they had forged against all odds, and in the promise of a shared future they were just beginning to imagine. 9 months later, JFK Airport buzzed with the frantic energy typical of a Friday afternoon. Emily advanced through the arrivals terminal, dragging a considerably heavier suitcase than when she left for London. Not just because of the books and restoration materials she had acquired, but because of the metaphorical weight of the experiences that had transformed her during her stay in England. She paused for a moment, nervously adjusting the necklace from which hung her engagement ring. Through video calls, messages, and occasional visits, Michael had traveled to see her 3 times, one of them accompanied by Nathan. They had kept their connection alive. But now, upon definitively returning, she felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that accompanies great reunions. Her eyes scanned the crowd until she saw them, Michael and Nathan standing side by side, holding an elaborate sign that said, "Welcome home, Master Restorer." The image of them together, so natural now when months ago it would have seemed impossible, made her heart expand with an almost painful joy. She couldn't contain the tears when Michael embraced her, lifting her slightly off the ground in his enthusiasm. Nathan waited his turn, and when he finally offered her a hug, timid but genuine, Emily felt that a circle was closing. "You look different," Michael commented, studying her with admiration as they walked to the car. "There's something... I can't explain it." "It's confidence," Nathan interjected with the insight Emily had come to deeply value. "The same look my teammates have after winning an important competition. As if you've confirmed something you already knew about yourself." Emily smiled, moved by the observation. "You're right," she confirmed. "London changed me in ways I'm just beginning to understand. Not just professionally, but..." She searched for the right words. "It helped me find myself separate from everything and everyone. To confirm that I can stand on my own merit." The trip to Westchester was full of updates. Nathan animatedly discussing his qualification for the National Sailing Championship, Michael explaining how he had reorganized his company to dedicate more time to personal projects and to the relationship with his son. Emily listened, absorbing the details of the lives that had continued in her absence, marveling at how the bonds between them had strengthened instead of weakening with distance. Upon arriving at the mansion, Emily was surprised to find not just Wilson waiting for her, but also her parents, Susan and David, comfortably conversing in the garden as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Mom! Dad!" she exclaimed, running to them. "I didn't know you would be here. It was Nathan's idea." Michael explained with a smile. He said a proper welcome should include the whole family. Emily looked at the teenager with gratitude, noticing the slight blush that colored his cheeks at the attention. In the months that had passed, Nathan had grown several inches, and his face was beginning to lose the last vestiges of childhood. But more impressive than his physical growth was the emotional maturity he demonstrated in gestures like this. Dinner was a joyful celebration, with dishes prepared by Susan and David, who had insisted on cooking Bronx specialties alongside wines selected by Michael. The mixture of worlds that once had seemed impossible now flowed with a natural harmony. Emily observed the scene with a sensation of fullness that surpassed even her best expectations. After dinner, while her parents animatedly conversed with Nathan about his sailing competitions, Michael took her hand and guided her to the restoration studio. "I have something to show you," he said, with a mysterious gleam in his eyes. Upon opening the door, Emily held her breath. The space, already impressive before her departure, had been completely transformed. New state-of-the-art equipment lined the walls. The lighting had been redesigned according to professional museum specifications, and a completely new area had been added with additional work tables. "What is all this?" she asked, surveying the space with amazement. "Your professional studio," Michael explained, "not just for personal projects but to establish your own restoration business if you wish. Everything is certified according to the most demanding international standards." Emily turned to look at him, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Michael, this is too much." "I didn't do it alone," he quickly clarified. "Nathan helped with the design, based on your comments during video calls about what you most admired in the London workshops. And there's something else." He pointed to a side door that Emily didn't remember. Upon opening it, she discovered a smaller but equally equipped space. "Nathan's studio," Michael explained with evident pride. "He's been taking art classes during your absence. He has a natural talent that, apparently, none of us had noticed." "It's been my escape," Nathan confessed, who had silently appeared at the main entrance. "When things got complicated at school or with friends, coming here on weekends and drawing, it helped me process everything." Emily approached the wall where several drawings were displayed. They were surprisingly good for someone without formal training. Seascapes primarily, but also studies of people in various activities, including a particularly moving one of Michael working concentrated in his office. "They're wonderful," she said sincerely. "You have a gift, Nathan." The teenager shrugged modestly, but the satisfaction in his gaze was evident. "I thought that maybe, when you have time, you could teach me more about color techniques. I've been practicing mainly with graphite and charcoal." "It would be an honor," Emily responded, moved by the request that represented much more than a simple artistic tutoring. Later that night, when everyone had retired and the house fell silent, Emily and Michael sat on the terrace beneath a surprisingly clear, starry sky for New York. The ring had returned to her finger, where it belonged. "Do you know what day it is?" Michael asked softly. Emily looked at him with curiosity. "Friday, May 17th. Does it have any special significance?" "Exactly 2 years since the day you walked into the Soho Gallery and looked at me as if I were a pretentious rich man trying to impress you," he responded with a nostalgic smile. Emily laughed, remembering that first encounter that seemed to belong to another life. "You were a pretentious rich man," she teased. "You just turned out to be much more than that." Michael took her hands in his expression becoming serious. "These 2 years have been the most transformative journey of my life," he said, with emotion-laden voice. "You arrived when I thought my capacity for real love, for authentic connections, was irreparably damaged. You showed me not just how to love again, but how to repair what I believed was beyond repair." Emily squeezed his hands, recognizing the depth of the feeling they shared. "We both transformed," she responded. "I too was trapped, though in a different way, limited by my own insecurities, by expectations of what was possible for someone like me. We liberated each other." "The wedding is scheduled for October, as we agreed," Michael continued. "But I wanted to ask you, do you still want the same thing? I don't just mean marrying me, but the life we're building, with all its complications and challenges." The question floated between them, laden not with doubt, but with respect for her autonomy, for the person she had become during her time in London. Emily looked toward the moonlit garden, thinking about the path traveled. She remembered the insecure young woman who adjusted paintings in the gallery, fearful of not really belonging to that refined world. She thought about the doubts that had tormented her during the first months of their relationship, the fear of being just another temporary conquest in the life of a powerful man. She recalled the revelation about Nathan and how that unexpected complication had ended up enriching her life in ways she never would have imagined. "What I want has evolved," she responded finally. "At the beginning, perhaps I sought security, opportunities I never had, an escape from limitations. Now I want something much deeper, to continue this story of restoration we've begun together, not just between us, but with Nathan, with our families, with the legacy we can create." She stood, extending her hand to him in a gesture of invitation. "Come with me," she said softly. "I want to show you something." She guided him back to the studio, where she opened one of her still unpacked suitcases. From it, she carefully extracted a canvas wrapped in protective material. With precise movements of a professional restorer, she uncovered it and placed it on a nearby easel. It was a self-portrait painted during her last weeks in London. It showed Emily in her English studio, but the background wasn't the London landscape visible from her window, but a carefully composed collage. The Soho gallery where everything began, the Westchester patio, the restoration studio with its tools, and subtly integrated the faces of Michael and Nathan, observing her with expressions of pride and affection. The technique was impeccable, revealing everything she had learned during her stay in England. But more impactful than the execution was the concept, a visual representation of how all these disparate pieces, places, people, moments, had integrated into a coherent and complex identity. Michael observed the painting in silence, absorbing its multiple layers of meaning. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with emotion. "It's extraordinary," he murmured. "You've perfectly captured the interconnection of everything." "It's my answer," Emily explained. "To your question about what I want now, this is what I want. This integration, this wholeness, not renouncing any part of myself or our history, but incorporating each element into something greater and richer than any of its individual parts." Michael embraced her from behind, both contemplating the canvas that encapsulated their shared journey. "Where shall we hang it?" he asked, his warm breath against her ear. "In the studio," she responded without hesitation. "Where it can inspire all of us. A reminder that restoration isn't just about returning to a previous state, but about integrating the past with the present to create something new, something that honors its origins, but is also completely original." As they observed the painting together, Emily reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first encounter in the gallery, when the worlds of the Bronx and Westchester seemed so irreconcilably distant, to this night, when those worlds not only coexisted, but mutually enriched each other. "You know," Michael said thoughtfully, "when I met you, I believed my life was already completely defined. I had professional success, had accumulated wealth and power, but internally I was fossilized, unable to change, to grow." He paused, searching for the precise words. "So you were like one of those solvents you use in your work," he continued with a smile. "You dissolved the layers of oxidized varnish that had hardened me, the pretenses and defenses accumulated over years. You allowed something more authentic, more alive to emerge." Emily turned to look at him directly, moved by the metaphor. "The difference is that in restoration we know exactly what's beneath those layers," she responded. "With people, it's an act of faith. We never know with certainty what will emerge when the defenses fall." "Was the risk worth it?" he asked, genuine vulnerability in his gaze. Emily smiled, remembering all the doubts, the moments of crisis, the difficult revelations, and also the instances of deep connection, unexpected joy, shared growth. "Every moment," she confirmed, "even the painful ones. Especially those." They remained silent a while longer, simply enjoying each other's presence and the feeling of having reached a good harbor after a complex voyage. It wasn't an ending, they both knew. It was simply a pause, a moment to appreciate the path traveled before continuing the journey together. As they walked back to their room hand in hand, the soft night breeze carrying the scent of spring blossoms from the garden, Emily felt a deep certainty about the future they were building. Not just the wedding that would formalize their union, but the family they were creating day by day, restoration by restoration, because that was the true art they had discovered together, not just fixing what was broken, but allowing something entirely new to emerge from the fragments. Something more beautiful and resilient precisely because it carried the marks of its history, the shadows and light of its journey, the art of rebirth.